Good morning, everybody. You can hear me okay? Nice to see you all, and it's great to be here in Dublin. Big shout out to Ralph and the team for organising this event today. And we've got a sort of tight time frame to stick with, so I'm going to canter through my slides quite quickly, and hopefully you'll be able to see the slides. There's a light issue here, but hopefully you'll be able to see the content. Maybe not. Ooh, they're all dark, so I haven't got much hope. So yeah, I just wanted to really give you an overview of our work within Scottish Futures Trust and how that is progressing and will evolve. Quick sort of context of who we are. Scottish Futures Trust is an independent company or organisation that is funded by Scottish Government. We work, as I said, independently with public and private stakeholders to create world-class infrastructure in Scotland. And we work with our stakeholders with a range of values: dynamic, bold, collaborative and ambitious, to encourage innovation and collaboration to achieve what's on the bottom right here, three sort of key values in terms of net zero, working towards a net zero country or society, creating new spaces and places where people can live in those environments, in terms of well-being and so forth, and diversity. There's about 70 people work within SFT that all have their niches and their expertise working together to create that. In terms of the BIM programme, I work with an infrastructure technology team which sits within a wider team called the Construction Industry and Delivery. And since 2017, we have managed the BIM programme for Scotland on behalf of Scottish Government. And that essentially was kick-started by the release of a procurement policy note which mandated the use of BIM on projects over £2 million. And I believe that's, I think at the time, was the first sort of mandate within the UK from a devolved government. And to support the public sector to deliver that, we created a portal, and there was some really key tools were created to support that. So encouraging clients initially to look at when they should adopt the note and to specify BIM in their project. So there's a grading tool. Then there was a return on investment where a client could appraise and look at different options to get a return on BIM against an initial investment, which helped support a business case. And then thirdly, there was a navigator itself, which supported the clients to deliver BIM at level 2 as it was then. The portal itself has been really successful. Since its launch, on average, we're getting about 6,000 or 7,000 users a month. And interestingly, under half of those are only in the UK, so we're getting international reach. And we're getting feedback that the tools, particularly the return on investment tool, is getting used globally. As I said, the portal was set up initially to support a level 2 approach, and so we've had to consider how we evolve that, given it's still in use and it's been successful, and how do we sort of evolve that in a natural way. And going back to the return on investment tool, we started to try to focus. I'm really sorry if you can't see those images, although it's not my fault. But we went back to the return on investment points and what was the key challenges that clients were facing and why they would need information. And we identified, at that stage there was a lot of noise in the sector and also in the mainline news around building failures at Grenfell, the inquiry that was happening after that. Within Scotland there was a lot of inquiries happening around, for example, there's a hospital and there's faults with that, and also a school gable, primary school gable had fell during school term time. So all these public investigations were happening, and what was interesting that within those reports there was identification that poor information management, poor handover, or lack of asset information or registers was hindering the inquiry's ability to be able to understand what those physical issues were that contributed to the failure of those buildings itself. So with that, that in itself presented a driver or an avenue that we should focus on. In addition, Scotland has in line with the UK, set very stringent targets to achieve net zero by 2045, and that obviously is including the existing estate as well as new build, and tackling the performance gap of the existing building. So again, putting clients front and centre of that approach, they need to have a really clear understanding and up-to-date understanding of how their buildings are operating. So information management is integral to that as well. So essentially, 3 key things that we identified it was needed for clients to be able to carry out their role in an information management capacity was to have structured data to manage their buildings, and in the event of a failure, that they would have attainable, accurate, and accessible information that would be there on hand, but also that the information that's being created, either retrospectively for the existing estate or for new buildings, is fit for purpose, that they can be used, there's no lock-in, they can exchange that freely across the supply chain, across the life cycle. So essentially, yeah, we're moving away from a paper-based files and boxes approach, which still exists. We all are familiar with the term the golden thread of information across the full life cycle and the intention and the purpose of that. But our view was, when we considered this, that needed guided in a way. The threads of information that were being produced needed some structure, some resilience, some consistency, and that standards and process was the means to deliver that. And that helped us in our initial approach of how we should form our next sets of resources to support the client. Obviously, we had the benefit of the new international standards which came out, which follows the life cycle, parts 1 to 3, but as I said, covers the whole life cycle and gives us that process and that structure to work within. So on that note, we developed what was called the Standard Information Management Plan, which is a resource which is to support clients, as I said, to deliver that consistency and value and benefits of information management across the full life cycle. And at the point of handover, that they would have a full set of accurate information that they can use to operate that facility or to get those insights in terms of performance. The program the resource has been released now for over 2 years. It's initially been rolled out on a schools program, a £2 billion schools program. So currently, I think there's 51 projects that are LEAP, which is the Learning Estates Investment Program, and non-LEAP. And the non-LEAP is where local authorities have started to use the resource out with the program. So it's about £1 billion worth of work there. And 2 key essential deliverables against that was a validated, as-built, constructed 2D and 3D information in recognition that there's a conglomerate of different types of information that need to be delivered, and a validated digital O&M information at handover. And really, through our stakeholder engagement with industry and the client side, we emphasize that the asset handover is a starting point of that building. It's not as we perceive traditionally in our own industry as it being the end point. It's actually the starting point. And it's essential to get that information right from that point. So I'm just going to quickly canter through these in terms of the key sort of parts of the resource and the reasons why we developed them. So there's a dashboard, a workbook, and templates. The dashboard itself supports clients to understand what their information management strategy should be at the briefing stage. There's some key questions that they would fill in. What is their existing folder structures? How do they store information? Do they have CAFMs they're trying to use? So forth, so forth. This is all available on the portal, so you can have a look at all of this in detail. But we understood that clients needed support. So a break from the norm, we were traditionally BIM managers or information managers would sit contractor side. There was an uplift in the funding that was available to the clients to be able to appoint client-side information managers that would come on board at the start. We call them the bookends, at the briefing stage, to support the clients and organizations to understand what they need to ask for, working within the structure of the resource. And also to be in hand at that handover point to do that checking service on behalf of the client, so the client doesn't realize a year later when something breaks within the building that information is missing. That's all checked at the point of handover. Unfortunately, you can't see this, but there's a link at the end of the slides. So you can go online and have a look. But there was an O&M template. We didn't make the O&M template up ourselves. We'd done a desktop a piece of research on what was out there currently within industry. So we looked at CIBSI, BISRIA, all their documentation, what they were saying was good handover practice. And all we did is essentially distill that, amalgamate it to diffuse any duplication, and we just structured that using Uniclass, the project management table, and used that as a means to set out the requirements. Additionally, we had a folder structure that the clients should adopt using that same PM structure, so the information that was handed over could be stored in a structured and consistent way client side. And that obviously was a break from what was traditionally the case, or is traditionally the case, where clients may just get a dump of folders at handover that goes into a top drawer and then the default back to the paper copies. But it was important that the clients understood that they should establish their own environment for that handover at those key stages with the Client Information Manager support. Just very quickly, moving on to version 2 of the Information Management Plan, we felt that where we got to wasn't granular enough. The feedback we were getting from both the clients and the contractors was clients were saying, the information we're getting from contractors, we're paying a premium for it, it's missing. Contractors were saying, clients are asking for information too late, and half the supply chain's already gone by the time we're tasked with capturing that data or them documents. So we decided to bring them both together into a working group, a sort of a non-contractual environment where we could all collaborate, and we could develop the information management plan as it stood more granularly and get into the sort of nuts and bolts of what needs to be asked. What was agreed that there's, in terms of this triangle in the center, there was a need for a really accurate document register at the end that linked back to a specification or a set of O&M manual requirements at the start, but that there should be an asset register that ideally could be developed fluidly through the design process, and a handover checklist as well to at the end. Version 2 was released in May this year. Probably the key changes are there's 2 workbooks now, one purely focused on asset management or asset handover, and one looking at the project information requirements. Just conscious of time, so I'm just going to canter through these, because I know Graham's going to pick up and go through some of this in detail in his own presentation later. But also at the bottom, we've got a project handover checklist, template 4, and you can go online and have a look at that. Again, that's all based on CIBSI and BISRIA best practice. In terms of asset naming, there was no consistent approach as we could find in industry around that. So we used COBE as a deliverable and used how we could use different parts of the COBE to do a concatenation and auto-generate that asset code or asset tag. And that had a backward effect where it enforced the design team and the contractors to make good quality models and good data and structure the models in a certain way. Because if that fails, essentially, we don't get that asset register, we don't get that naming convention. We also were tackled with the conundrum of how do we specify, or how do clients specify the information requirements at a really early stage without knowing what assets are in the building. So we took an approach to grade assets. We had a grading criteria of 1 to 6, 1 being critical, 6 being a typical grill or a piece of ductwork. And by having a definition of that grade and the criticality of that within a building or a system within a building, we were able to predetermine what information would be required. So once on a project a model element was inserted, it could be have an automatic grading, or it could be reviewed, and there'd be a predetermined set of information requirements against that. That was broken down into 3 key areas: the designers, what they had to deliver, the suppliers, and then the installers. Quite often, installers are separate from suppliers as a subcontracted organization. But that resource is completely flexible. The client can go in and change that with their asset management team. Just very quickly on the last few slides, we then done a desktop piece of research on probably about a dozen schools that have been delivered across the UK, and we were able to identify probably approximately 80% of consistent assets had been in those schools. So we were able to create our own master asset list that could be adopted, was graded, with an asset code. But further still, we went and we brought in industry expertise to create a resource using the Autodesk classification tool to support delivery teams to be able to map classification codes to those elements as soon as they're put in the model. It was a real issue with contractors to absorb the risk of the design team models at a certain stage. So this was a way to alleviate that, where you could assign a classification code in a model and automatically all the other codes would be mapped. So in terms of where we are with version 2, just to summarize, to round up, it's currently being deployed again on the schools program. The working group is still engaged. We're widening that group to include FM and project managers and so forth, and to get that feedback loop and to make those necessary changes or tweaks to the resource. But also we're working with industry and internally within SFT with our colleagues to start to identify other information sets or clusters of information that could be predetermined and could be inserted within the workbook. So, for example, there's the construction quality assurance initiative, a big initiative that's happening in Scotland at the moment. There's identified information requirements within that. Net zero. 1 minute. Yeah, thank you. And then also we're working with building standards within Scotland to have a preset set of information requirements for handover. And lastly, the Passive House Institute, they've just completed a piece of work which should be released soon. It's an overlay for the REBA planner work. Within that, there's information requirements for each stage, and we were able to work with them to put that into the workbook. So, just conscious of time, just a recap, just to summarize on benefits. So clients, the resource allows clients to be able to receive fit-for-purpose asset information at project handover. The contractors can have clearly defined requirements at the outset, which offers assurance and certainty of scope, which it can cascade at the outset down the supply chain. And the supply chain themselves can have that consistency of handover requirements to be able to plan what they need to deliver and also to upskill in advance. And overall, the resource provides that quality assurance as it's aligned to the international standards. That's it for me. I hope you've enjoyed the presentation, and thank you.
Right. So, just to maintain the sort of the link within conversations, we're going to now introduce Pedro, and Pedro will be speaking about information management plans, but more from a private sector perspective.